Hello, I'm Kimberly Parnell, and you are listening to Engaging Texas Families, a podcast from the Parent and Family Engagement Statewide Initiative of Texas. Let's jump into today's episode. Today, we're joined once again by Dr. Steve Constantino and Dr. Peggy Constantino. In this episode, we'll explore the impact of building family efficacy. This is such an important topic as it relates to parent and family engagement. If this is your first time joining us, we're currently working through the Constantinos case study book. If you've missed any of the previous episodes, I highly recommend going back to listen. They're packed with great discussions and wisdom and even some fun. So, Constantinos, thanks for being with us again today.
Pleasure.
Also, we're joined today by two of my teammates, Shannon Lang, the Parent and Family Engagement Statewide Initiative Coordinator, and Matthew Chavez, who's an education specialist on our team. Guys, thanks for joining us today with the Constantinos.
Thanks for having us. We're glad to be here.
Yes, thanks for having us, Kimberly.
Great. Well, let's jump in. I want to start just a little bit differently today. Before we get to the case study and the discussion on that, can one of you unpack exactly what family efficacy is for our listeners?
I'll try to do that pretty quickly. You know, there's a great deal of research, both in the field of efficacy and then in the field of family efficacy. But to try to keep it simple, sometimes I try to simplify it down to one statement, and that is one's belief in their ability to produce an effect. So when someone has a high efficacy, it translates into a high belief that they can do what it is they've set out to do, that they have the skills, they have the knowledge, and they have within them the ability to meet or exceed a task. Family efficacy is no different. It's the degree to which families feel as though they are empowered, have the knowledge and skill to help and support their children in school. One of the ideas of efficacy that I think is important is that there is a correlation, I guess, a relationship of sorts between those families who are disengaged and their own view of their own efficacy. It is very common for families who are disengaged to feel as though they lack the skills, they lack the knowledge, they lack the empowerment to help their children. And promoting family efficacy helps to fill that void.
Perfect. Now that we understand that a little bit better, Peggy, will you share with us about the case study that we've chosen today and its importance to family engagement?
Sure. The case study today is set in the time of COVID. So the experience that the case study is around is a reaction to what happened to everybody is, oh, all of a sudden we can't be together. How do we do things away? And it's a discussion of teachers around this announcement that they will be having to send things home and work with families and students from afar. And the conversation begins with one of the teachers really coming around quickly to this idea that sending things home wasn't going to be quite as sufficient in terms of learning and the focus on learning, and how to create a dynamic where the families are able to do what's being asked of them. Not necessarily, I don't think that we predicted in her mind that she was doing it for family efficacy, but it shows how the thinking about how students learn and handing that learning over to folks who may not be prepared in any way to do it mattered. And so this as the story goes, this teacher took it upon herself and her team to really think of this as differently. And thinking beyond just sending things home, but thinking about how important it was for the families to understand and participate in both the instruction, but also giving her feedback about how it went with the students so she could still provide teaching and learning and assessment of learning.
Great. And if I remember correctly, she's a relatively new teacher, isn't that correct?
Yes, doesn't have any of that old ideas of it's their problem, not mine. Yeah, it comes in with a very new way of thinking.
I love it. I love it. One of the things that stood out to me is that the teacher's understanding that parents are the first teachers for our kiddos, but they lack the school know-how or the how to teach, but she still saw the need to include them. In your opinion, what was the value of that for the children's success?
I think the children's success gives them a chance to actually engage with the families, but the chance to get really good feedback about what actually happened with the learning. It was more than just a check the box or send it back signed. She actually really designed it so the parents could provide her with really important information, which kept that learning going and certainly produced the outcomes that she had hoped for by giving them the tools they needed, along with the tools that the student needed to make that difference.
Yes. Steve, you have anything else to add there?
No, I think Peggy's covered it really well. The assignment, the reason why the case study is called The Main Idea is because the assignment was an English language arts assignment to an elementary child to find the main idea of a paragraph. And we think about something that simple, how a one little paragraph for a first or second grade student who needs to identify the main idea, how hard can that be? When you translate that into something that has gone home in a time during COVID when communication was tough, you start to think about little things. And what if the student doesn't understand it? What if if your child comes home and has something to do and puts their hand on their head and says, "I don't know what to do." The parent can probably read the directions and say, "Well, you're to do this and do this and do this." So you need to find the main idea. So if the question is, "I don't know what to do," there's a pretty good chance that the parent has a good opportunity to answer that question. But if the question from the student is, "What's a main idea?" everything just changed.
Right.
And so this case study highlights the importance of a teacher, in my opinion, our opinion, helping parents understand not only what to do, but what it is and what to look for and what they should hear from their child, and provide them an opportunity to feed back to the teacher saying, "Hey, my kid got it," or "You know what, we struggled with it." That kind of, I think we call that checking for understanding. How much feedback did we get from parents, and how many of them were successful and how many of them struggled? I would think teachers would want to know that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It highlights one of the important tenets of building efficacy, which is modeling. So it aligns really, really tightly with Bandura's research and showing the way. The modeling is a big piece of that. And so not just for students, but it's also here in her directions to the families.
Great. Shannon, I know you and both the Constantinos have some experience as an administrator. So with that in mind, what's the value of a teacher who thinks creatively about parent and family engagement? And all three of you can just give your input because it might be interesting dependent on where you've been.
We'll let Shannon start.
Yeah.
Okay. When I think about and reflect on the teachers that stick out in my mind who were so great at the family engagement piece, I really saw them as leaders. You knew they were going to be your next round of leaders that come through because they identified that they can't do this by themselves. They identified that parents were were another resource to help the students be successful. It wasn't that I have to do it in my room, I have to do it by myself, and if I let anyone else see or ask for help, it's a sign of weakness. So that's what I really appreciated about those teachers who partnered with parents is, they were just accepting that they needed as much help as the parent does so that the child could be successful. And it was all about the child. It wasn't about pride. It wasn't about, self-assurance. It was about the student.
Yeah, I think too, to reach back to the last podcast where we talked about communications and relationships, teachers who instinctively engage families have probably worked very hard on developing relationships with families, in some families where it might be difficult,
Yes.
let's be honest, to develop a relationship. because the relationships build trust and relationships eliminate fear. And if we can do those two things, then there can be a really great dialogue between teachers and families. And so when I saw teachers who were receptive to the idea, that's what I saw. I saw teachers, who understood the importance of building a relationship. And something you said, I think is important. One of the books I wrote, the opening line was, if we as educators could successfully teach all children by ourselves, and it seems to me we would have already done so. And so that idea, I think when people kind of embrace that idea, understand the relationship that parents have to their own children's learning. And if we can cultivate that, there are great successes.
Yeah.
I think as a leader, for me, I see this teacher as a chance to have a model within the school too. So certainly with the parents, but these are those early adopters where you can maybe take this team and say, she did this alone, but you guys could all do this together. I think teachers tend to work in isolation so often. These are ways to say, gosh, if you each took a unit, and created those things, especially at elementary and middle where they do tend to work in teams, these are ways to kind of move that needle and, give some highlighting to this group and say, you could be the early adopters here. You could make this work. And I think that's another way to build the capacity in your school, not as the leader saying it, but now you've got teachers that can do it and they can speak to the success of that work.
Absolutely. I think there's a tendency sometimes to, in a group of teachers, maybe there's a newer teacher and a group of people who are a little more seasoned to say, well, that's not how we've done it, or we've never done it that way. And I think as we get a little bit older and maybe a little bit more seasoned, that becomes comfortable for us. And so I think as educators, as long as we're willing to always have an open mind when it comes to that, like maybe that would have flopped for that sweet little girl, but it had incredible success for her. And I love that, like just to keep an open mindset. But that's not always the case. It's something that we have to try really hard for.
Right.
Yeah.
There are opportunities for innovation because unfortunately a lot of this flipped back when we came back in person. So I'm a fan of Fullen, and Fullen always says, there's two lanes, and one is dealing with what's in front of you, and the second one is opportunity for innovation and traveling in the two. And I think a lot of us did this when we needed to do it and then just fell back and lost the moment.
Yes. Steve, did you have something to add there?
Well, understanding that there's a lot of teachers that listen to this, there's two truths that I want to make sure that we share. Number one, the first thing I know that teachers think about is, where am I going to get the time, or one more thing to do, or how's this going to work, or, I've tried that and failed. Those are real things that have happened, and I want to acknowledge those things. And I've probably said before, and I'll say it again, family engagement should never be about doing more. It should always be about doing what we do differently. And if we can do something differently, we very quickly learn that we garner a different result. I also want to acknowledge that there are lots of difficulties with many families. There's a lot of angst, there's a lot of stress, there are a lot of issues out in the world. And sometimes it can seem impossible, impossible to reach a family, impossible to work with a family. And I've been at this long enough to tell you from firsthand experience that nothing is impossible. That every family wants their child to exceed them in their quality of life. Perhaps they may not behave that way sometimes, and I get that. But I think if we remember that, there's always fertile ground to build something. Are we going to have the same level of success with every family? Maybe not. But we will have some levels of success with every family. And I think that's the important point.
Wow, that's a good thought. Matthew, I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, my thoughts were already tracking on the same as what Steve just shared. he talked about every parent wants better for their kids. They may not always act that way. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be careful of, is that understanding the concept of efficacy helps us to understand that oftentimes those attitudes that are projected by parents, it's all about masquerading. I don't want to show that I don't have confidence in being able to help my child. So I'm going to put on this mask of apathy. I'm going to put on the invisibility cloak that you don't even know that I exist because I never respond to your emails, your phone calls, the notes home, whatever it might be. But they're masks that families put on to just hide the fact that I want to help, but I don't even know where to begin. And I don't want to make the problem worse. And so when we look at that and we understand the concept of efficacy, I think it can help teachers in many ways be able to break the code and start reaching out to those families and be able to talk with them and say, how can I help you? What are the things that you need help with so that we can come together as a united front and be able to help your child succeed? I don't want you to feel as though you're a partner with me in your child's education that's incapable, because you have a lot to offer. You have many assets, but there's going to be things that I have to lean on you for support, and then there's going to be some things where you're going to have to lean on me for support.
Yeah, I'm going to take that one step farther, because I think that mask of apathy is real. There's also another mask that some families wear, and that is a mask of anger, where they are combative, where they are questioning, where they can be difficult. One of the things I try to help folks remember is that anger is almost always a mask for fear.
Yep.
And when someone comes at you, full barreled, do your best to remember that what's driving that is some sort of fear. And in many cases, it's the fear that their child will fall behind. It's their fear that their child won't be successful. It's the fear that their child won't graduate. And if we can just remember that, I find the fear, resolve the anger.
Wow, that's great wisdom.
And I'm trying to remember, it was a quote, and I can't remember the author right now, but it was one of my favorites, and it was that anger is fear's bodyguard. Mm-hmm. And I always tried to remember that, knowing that many parents who came, up to the school or whatnot, who were visibly angry, it was because of that fear and all of the things that you just mentioned, fear of their child failing or fear of falling behind. But going back to Matthew's point of admitting that I no longer know how to do 8th grade algebra. I mean, how embarrassing
That's a real
is that?
fear.
It is real. But I think it also goes back to what Matthew was talking about, efficacy, but it goes back another couple steps to what Steve had talked about. And before we can do that, we have to build relationships and we have to build trust. Because if we don't have that trust between the family, between the teacher, it's going to be very hard for that family to admit, I need help, I don't know how to.
Right.
Right. This teacher helped avoid any of that by not assuming that the parents knew or didn't know, but provided enough that they could decide where to go. I didn't know 8th grade algebra when I was in 8th grade. So, the fear would have been real in my world today. But I think that's what I see in some of these teachers who understand it, is they're not making a judgment. They're going to give them everything and let it go. But, I think in this case especially, we want the parents to be a little bit of a hero with their child. And again, building their confidence means they're going to feel better about asking questions and wanting to know more and wanting to be more engaged.
Perfect. Does anyone have any closing thoughts?
Oh, one, during COVID, a lot of studies and research were done. They're probably still going on. But at the height of COVID, an organization called Learning Heroes did a series of studies. And the very first study that they put out was extremely eye-opening, because one of the findings was that I don't remember the exact number, 70 or 72% of families that were involved in this research had a far better appreciation for their child's teacher and what happened in school. But the same research also reminded everyone that the way we had to conduct education in COVID by bringing it into the homes and allowing families for the first time, my old joke, what did you do in school today? Well, COVID answered the question. They saw it. And researchers call that parental activation. Parents have been activated. Things have changed, and they're not going to go back to the way they were, no matter how much, we want to go back to normal, whatever that is. That's gone. And so we have this golden opportunity to do things differently and to garner a better result.
I absolutely agree. Such good thoughts. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I love that this has been a good just back and forth dialogue and discussion, and that everybody is so passionate about it. We're excited about our next episode. Steve, you want to tell us about the topic for that one?
Yeah, we're gonna continue with the 5 principles model and go to move to the 4th principle, which is engaging families in decision making, and that's always an interesting topic too. So I can't wait to explore that one.
Yes, I think it sounds exciting, and I hope that everyone will join us again for the next episode of Engaging Texas Families.